At E3 2009, Monolith Soft announced a brand new JRPG for the Nintendo Wii, this game originally being Monado Beginning of the World. However, the late and great Nintendo president Satoru Iwata had the name changed to celebrate the director and series creator Tetsuya Takahashi's previous work. The name was then changed to Xenoblade in Japan. In 2011, over a year later, the game was officially confirmed beginning a European release with another name change, Xenoblade Chronicles. However, no word at the time was given to its overseas release. After being absent from E3 2011 and a huge campaign by a group known as Operation Rainfall, Nintendo of America finally confirmed the game would be making its North American release. When it finally did happen and released overseas, Xenoblade Chronicles was a success critically, and over the years garnered even more attention and love, thanks to things like Shulk's inclusion in Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U, and the famous Let's Play by Chugga, I'm Inside Daisy's Heart-Shaped Box, Conroy. I was one of the many who fell in love with the game. If you'd like to know my full story as to how I fell in love with the game and my sort of timeline with it, I'll leave a link down below to my Returning to Bionis video where I go into more detail. But to put it short and sweet, this is my favorite game of all time. It's always had and always will hold a special place in my heart, and I can't stress enough how much I loved it. However, throughout the years of Xenoblade X, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn to the Golden Country, I always had the thought in the back of my mind, what about a remake or a remaster of Xenoblade Chronicles? Well, that answer finally came to me and many others in September of 2019 with the official announcement of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. A trailer that made me the happiest gamer in the land of weeaboos, and I was incredibly happy beyond words. No, literally, I was basically screaming and speaking gibberish. After a long drought of no info, we finally got a brand spanking new trailer in March of this year, and an official release date. It's been a few weeks since the game's official release, and I've beaten it as well as Future Connected, the brand new epilogue to the game, with Adam Howden and Jenna Coleman reprising their roles as Shulk and Melia. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about it. I want to spend this time talking about what has changed in DE, from the visuals, music, mechanics, etc. Don't expect a full story recap where I mispronounce the party members' names, because I'm not IGN. With that said, Actually, this is probably more fitting. Let's go, everyone! Let's start with the synopsis. As Shulk says in the beginning, long ago the world was nothing more than an endless sea, cloaked in a boundless sky. Then two great titans came into existence, the Bionis and the Mechonis. After a massive battle between the two, both titans stopped and stood still for eons, and our story takes place a year after the events of the Battle of Sword Valley, a war between the Homs, the humans living on Bionis along with the other species, and the Mechon, the species living on Mechonis. Our story follows Shulk, a young and budding scientist who is studying the only weapon that can store the Mechon armor, the Monado. After an event that hurts the heart and soul of everyone in his hometown of Colony 9, Shulk and his best friend Ryan set out on an adventure to stop the Mechon. Along the way, new friends are met, revelations are discovered, and much, much more. It's still surprising to me how this large of a story was able to be fit in the Wii. This game has over 10 hours worth of cutscenes, all of them completely voice acted, of which the voice work is still amazing. Highlights for me are still Rufus Jones as Dunban, Jay Taylor as Ryan, Jenna Coleman as Melia, and of course Adam Howden as Shulk, but all of them do an incredibly good job. But let's talk about the story for a brief bit here, but not too long. This is a remaster after all. The story still holds up in my eyes. It's a story with a whole heaping amount of twists and turns that are still effective and, for the most part, are extremely well executed. The story never really does lose traction for me, not even once. The intrigue of Shulk and his visions, how does he have them? Why can he use the Monado? What are the other races on Bionis? And as the game puts it, why do Bionis and Mechonis have to keep on fighting? I still love this story to death even 10 years later. It's not perfect, sure, some of the characters do feel like they get much more screen time than others, and some feel like they're underdeveloped like Ricky, for example. But I still loved it, and in DE's case, the game makes the story even better with its massively improved visuals. Which actually leads us to our next point to talk about, the visuals. Now, before launch, there was a big amount of discourse surrounding the resolution. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition runs at 720p to 504p docked, and 540p to 378p in handheld mode. Just to get this out of the way, since this was a big issue some were talking about prior to its launch, I never really found this to be an issue throughout my 100 plus hours of playtime. All of the environments look beautiful, and sometimes I just had to stand on a cliffside and just look out. If you aren't aware, Tetsuya Takahashi, the series creator, had said that about 60% of the game was remade from scratch for Definitive Edition, and a lot of the time, it shows. But overall, whether it was Troll Marsh at nighttime, Aerith Sea, Bionis Leg, and especially Valak Mountain at nighttime, all of the environments look downright gorgeous. If the quality did dip in my playthrough, I barely noticed it, or it was barely an issue for even more than a couple of seconds at most. Even in some of the most hectic moments in battle, I never really found it to be a major issue. The frame rate though did dip every now and then. I mostly noticed it in Magna Forest, big shock, but it never really did harm my general experience. Now, while the environments look downright phenomenal even with the less than stellar resolution, How about the character models? Now, while the environments did look amazing on the Wii, the character models, not so much. Everyone had a case of flat face, and textures could look extremely muddy. While the original game looks fine in this day and age, the models definitely do hold it back a bit. In DE, the character models have been tremendously improved, and I don't mean just seeing Shulk's big ol' nostrils now. The facial expressions are the big point I want to touch on, especially compared to the original. A great example here is in the beginning scene of Magna Force with Melia, when her guards tell her to run. Her face goes from anger to genuine worry as she worries for her guards' fates, compared to the original where she just looks super pissed off, to put it lightly. But even the facial expressions in those sort of cutscenes that I'm showing you now are also tremendously improved. There's such a wider range of emotion than before. Even with the new art style given to these characters, I think it works very well here as someone who was initially still a bit skeptical but optimistic they could pull it off. I think they honestly look phenomenal here. I will always hold a soft spot for how the original looks, but DE just looks better in practically every way. Whether it was the individual armor pieces or weapons that were recreated, the world around you, or simply the characters themselves, it looks plain amazing. This holds true for the cutscenes as well, which have also obviously received a tremendous visual upgrade. It's given these are going to look great. To be fair, these cutscenes were great in the original too, but damn, they're even better here, and combined with improved lighting and facial expressions, it helps even more. I sort of do miss Ryan being a bit more of a redhead though. For some reason his hair is a bit darker here. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was something I felt like pointing out. When it comes to the visuals though, this holds true for the UI, which has also received almost a complete overhaul. The UI is now way less cluttered compared to the original, especially in battles, and things like menus as well as the new look for the Collectopedia are things that I really love. There are new battle portraits, the enemy plates have been completely redone to show things like spike damage more clearly. The minimap, oh the minimap. What else can I say? The visuals are downright amazing in DE. Even with a lackluster resolution, it rarely ever impacted my general experience. I couldn't be any happier with how this game looks. For the most part. This will be slightly negative, but I will admit that there definitely are moments I noticed where the environments looked about on par with the Wii, this shot on Bionis Leg being a good example. The other complaint is actually grass poppin'. Now this was a thing in the original, grass popping in as you got closer, but it's a lot more obvious here in my opinion with the higher quality visuals. I mostly noticed it in Bionis Leg. But thankfully areas like Magna Force that had a large amount of poppin' in the original have been completely fixed. Thank the Lord for that. Monolith, in my opinion, knocked it out of the park in almost every way, even with some of the aforementioned negatives. When it did come to cutscenes though, there were a few issues I noticed. There are going to be some spoilers in here, so I'd recommend skipping to this point now if you don't want to see these cutscenes. 3, 2, 1. For some reason, some of the cutscenes in this can be kind of buggy. Now in my experience, only one cutscene was buggy in my end that was kind of noticeable. For example, the cutscene where Zord takes Juju. For some reason, there is just no music here at all. In the original, the music piece Crisis plays in the scene, I believe, but there's actually no music at all. It kind of makes me wonder if this was actually intentional and they wanted to remove the music, because I'm pretty sure everybody has this issue. Let me know down below though if you don't. But really, that's about all the negatives I can give towards the visuals. Even with some of the problems I've mentioned, it looks amazing. Monolith did an amazing job recreating and remastering the game on the Switch, and I do hope some patches are going to fix some of the weird issues that I mentioned earlier. But for the most part, it's an amazing experience visually. But of course, visuals aren't everything in an RPG. What matters most in a lot of ways is the gameplay. With the story still being as amazing as before in my eyes, but now in HD and with a lot less flat face, what about the gameplay? Now, while I do love the original game, I can understand why it does turn some people away in the gameplay department. It's a lot thrown at you at once, from the battle mechanics to the affinity chart, the world around you, things like that. It's a very hectic experience, I think is the right word. However, DE does try to do some things to make the experience a bit less confusing and overwhelming to the player. Somewhat. Let's get down to the battle system. Now, at its core, it's the same as before. You run around the enemy with the character you're controlling, and as you're running around them, or standing still, you auto-attack, and that auto-attack fills up a percentage of your talent gauge for most characters. When the talent gauge is full, for most characters, you can unleash a powerful attack, or in Shulk's case, use a Monado art. There's also the other arts, which some have different attributes depending on when and how you use them. It definitely does sound like a lot, and that's completely fair if even that sounds a little bit confusing to you. However, Monolith has tried to streamline it at least a little bit. Certain arts that you can use will inflict more damage or a status effect to the enemy depending on when and where in the enemy that you use it. For example, Shulk's art Backslash deals more damage if you use it from the back. Slit Edge deals more damage from the side and lowers their physical defense. But there's also other things like Break, Topple, and Daze. There are certain arts in the game like Shulk's Stream Edge or Air Slash that can deal Break on an enemy, which one of your party members can follow up with a Topple art to get them knocked down, and then another can follow up with the Daze art, knocking the enemy down for even longer. While I do love this system, there were a few things holding it back. For one, with some enemies, it was a bit tough to figure out where to attack them from to get the bonus effect, like with the Nebula enemies for example. Also, Break, Topple, and Daze obviously doesn't last forever. There's a set amount of time that effect will last and when you can follow up with the Topple or the Daze art. This though was practically random in the original, with no way to actually determine when the Break, Topple, or Daze effect goes away. Monolith though has taken steps to improve it. For example, backslash and slit edge type attacks, where you need to attack a certain part of the enemy, have been updated a bit. When you get to an enemy in or out of battle, you now have this chance prompt that pops up on screen, and an exclamation point on your art that corresponds to the chance prompt. This is telling the player that they're in a part of the body where, if they use that art, then they can get that bonus damage or effect. For example, Shulk's backslash deals more damage from the back. Well, there's a prompt that will tell you when you should backslash for more damage. Already a really nice improvement over the original in my eyes, as it makes certain enemies easier to kind of figure out. While it may seem like you have the right spot you need to attack an enemy, you might not, since the hitboxes can be a bit wonky with that. This was one of the best additions in my eyes, but my favorite has to be what they did to Break, Topple, and Daze effects. Like I said, in the original, it was basically a guessing game. You basically had to just guess when your break timer was going to run out. However, DE has taken some pages from Xenoblade 2 and has now given you a timer for when these run out. For example, you now can see specifically when your break will run out, and subsequently, how much time you have to inflict Topple and then Daze. Out of all the new additions in the combat department, this is easily my favorite. I always hated how in the original it was basically a big old guessing game, but with this existing, it's great for both old and new players. Old players are relieved they no longer have to guess when it runs out and hope they can get it off in time, and it's much more intuitive for newer players. Easily the best new addition to combat in my eyes. But what about just the world around Bionis itself? Of course, this being an RPG, you have shops, massive worlds, side quests, new areas to explore, side quests, new NPCs to talk to, and oh, did I mention side quests? One of the most notorious things in the original, gameplay-wise, were side quests. It's not like the rewards you got were bad or anything, that wasn't really an issue. Hell, a lot of the time, they weren't really tough. However, there were just so damn many. Plus, some side quests like collection quests require you to hunt down specific items through item orbs, which were completely randomized, and you had no way of knowing which item orb had the item that you needed. On top of this, a lot of these quests were just generic repeat quests, go hunt this monster, over and over and over again. Or for certain monster quests, you needed to find a specific monster, but it was hard to determine whether it needed to be at night, during the day, which area, etc. You want to know how bad this could be in the original? I spent in the original game hunting down 4 wool rocks in Satoral Marsh for 10 hours. I'm not joking. It's why Xenoblade Chronicles is always sort of notorious for needing a guide or using Chugga Conroy's playthrough. However, Monolith has once again tried to make questing much easier. In my opinion, the single best addition in this game, by far, from the visuals to everything else I mentioned prior, is the brand new tracking feature. If you aren't aware what this entails, you can now track specific side quests and figure out where you need to go to complete that objective. And I mean for every single side quest. You need to find a monster? Track that side quest and that blue line of magic will lead you right to it on the minimap. You need to find an item? Track it and that blue line will lead you right to it. This works for NPCs too, as there are side quests where you need to go talk to specific NPCs, and this can help you out with that. This, without a doubt, was the best new feature in my eyes. If you're wondering, I did over 400 side quests in my playthrough, and this tracking feature I can guarantee took off many, many hours of playtime that I would have just spent hunting around for an item or an enemy. Without a doubt in my mind, this is the single best new addition to the game to me. Side quests are still repetitive, sure, but they're much less tedious now that you know where you can go if you track it. But let's talk about some other nice quality of life changes. First off, the affinity chart. Now, how this works. Throughout the areas in the game that you'll visit, you'll come across named NPCs. When you talk to them, you add them to the affinity chart, and the more you talk to the other NPCs, the more relationships you can see with other members of said area. However, when you do a side quest, those relationships can possibly change for better or for worse. There's more to it, but that's just the general gist of what I'm going to talk about here. With these named NPCs though, you can trade with them to get certain items, whether it's armor pieces, items for the returning Collectopedia, etc. In the original though, you can only see that NPC's personality, their time active, gender, race, and the general area where they were in. While this wasn't bad, it was also a bit of a pain not being able to see if an NPC had the item that you could trade for, and it was also a pain not having a specific landmark where they could be at. DE once again comes through with a good amount of improvements to the affinity chart. Remember those two things I mentioned earlier, not seeing the exact area they were at and not being able to see the items they could trade? Well, that's been fixed in DE. This is a really solid quality of life improvement overall that surprisingly does wonders for certain things. I wish I recorded the example I had, but sadly I wasn't. Basically, I had to find a specific item before I left Colony 9 for the Collectopedia. However, I was missing just one item. I was looking through the affinity chart and I noticed Kenny Rohan actually traded it. I went over, traded the item with him, and completed the Collectopedia for Colony 9. You can also track the NPCs too, which is also pretty nice, especially for a late game. But here's the other thing. Say you don't like any of those features and you'd prefer to play the game just like the original, you can do that. You can turn off those options like the tracking and play the game like the original. There are options here for almost every player, and I think they really did a great job here giving these options. There's also fashion gear, where you can now choose the outfit that you want your character to have throughout the game. If you want to use an armor set but you don't like the visual of it, or you want to match the armor piece you don't have. But with that said, not everything gameplay-wise is perfect, so here are some critiques that I felt. One thing for combat, hot damn, I wish the AIs were better. This was a notoriously big issue in the original. If you had characters like Shulk and Charla as your AI, it was rough. I swear to God, Donald's more efficient than Charla when it comes to healing. Things like these, sadly, were not fixed for DE at all, and I will admit, this is a drawback at times for battles. Seriously, these are still super annoying at times. I remember getting frustrated with Charla in the original and here. But really, that's about all I can say gameplay-wise. Really, the quality of life changes here in the additions that Monolith have done here really do make the game that much better and way more approachable to newcomers in my eyes. From things like tracking to the improved affinity chart, especially for combat, things like that, Monolith did an amazing job here, really listening to the feedback and criticism people had about the original and fixing them accordingly for the most part. But if we're going to talk about new additions, oh my god, the music. If you don't know, Xenoblade Chronicles features, in my opinion, some of the best music in a JRPG. For DE, 90 plus tracks were either re-recorded or the quality is just much higher now. For example, songs like Unfinished Battle, Prologue A and B, and the opening, those are exactly the same. However, I believe at least every single environmental piece was re-recorded for DE, and certain songs have either new additions or were re-recorded entirely. Now, I do hold the original soundtrack in high regard, so it was going to be hard to top it. In my opinion, these songs either match the original or in some ways surpass it. For example, I actually prefer the new obstacle in our path compared to the original. I honestly love that key change. But songs like Engage the Enemy, I'm not a huge fan of the new vocals. I prefer the original's vocals were much more subtle, but here, the vocals are loud and proud. Don't get me wrong, it's extremely impressive, but it's in my opinion inferior vocals-wise to the original. But these songs are still amazing, both the re-recorded ones and the ones that simply have better quality now. But hey, say you don't like those new songs, you want to have the original things, you can turn them off and listen to the original arrangements if you want, so you aren't forced to listen to the new songs. Hold your horses though, because we're not done just yet. We're done talking about the base game, but let's talk about Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected. Future Connected is the brand new epilogue story included in DE that takes place a year after the events of Xenoblade Chronicles. This story sees Shulk, Melia, and two Napan children, Kino and Nene, exploring an area that was cut from the original, the Bionic Shoulder, to reach the capital of Alchemoth, Melia's home. If you're nervous about this, don't worry, I won't be spoiling any major plot points in here, only stuff that was kind of revealed in trailers. However, this really won't take too long to talk about. Future Connected was something I was really excited for from the very start. After playing and beating it, it's okay. When it comes down to the story, I sadly find it to be the weakest aspect of Future Connected. The story just feels like nothing super special, and it only feels like it's here to give Melia a much better ending. To be fair, it does. Melia in the original, if you played it, you know you can't help but feel bad for her. In Future Connected, she's given a good bit more and given a much more heartwarming and nice ending for her, compared to the original where she didn't. Also, I really like Kino and Nene. These two aren't super in-depth characters, excluding a few moments that I really enjoy. They're mostly here for comic relief, and they really nailed a good bit of the time. But aside from that, the story is nothing special. The plot point that's established early on of these two groups that's separated because one has Machina living in it could have been cool, but is practically forgotten about until the end and is quickly resolved. Also, the main threat being the new Fog Beasts and Fog King just aren't intimidating in my opinion. Takahashi said that Future Connected was sort of going to be the setup for the future of the series. If you meant the Fog Beasts, so far at least, I do love their designs, and they do leave me intrigued for the future at the very least, but in Future Connected at least, they don't feel like anything special. Also, another thing that's kind of related to the story, what happened to the subtitles? Sometimes they're just off in DE. A lot of the time they're accurate, but sometimes they just plain and simply are horribly matched up to the dialogue. How did they not catch this? Sadly, I do feel the weakest aspect of Future Connected is its story. While it does a better job of actually giving Melia a better ending, and it's great to see her get one, especially making up with the returning Tyrea, it's just a very lackluster and bland story. If you were to ask me, Torn of the Golden Country story from Xenoblade 2 is much better. At the very least, it's great to hear Jenna Coleman and Adam Pound return as Melia and Shulk respectively. And Jenna Coleman returning was a huge shock for me, but it was awesome. The new voice talent for Kino and Nene are also really great too, though I swear to God Kino sounds like Chucky from Rugrats. But let's talk about gameplay now. Like I said earlier, Feature Connected finally brings in the famously cut area from the original, the Bionis shoulder. Let's start off with that. In my opinion, the best part of Feature Connected is finally being able to explore the shoulder. This is awesome to finally be able to do, and it's visually really great looking to boot. I'd say it's about on the levels of Bionis leg in terms of size, maybe a bit smaller. But there's so much to find and do here. From all these different caves giving you hints as to life that was previously here on the shoulder, to the beautiful landscapes, this area was a beauty to explore, and I was so happy to finally see this area realized in all of its glory. But that's not all to do, because you also have these new quiet moments, essentially this game's heart-to-hearts. However, these are actually fully voiced and have no options in them. These are much longer than heart-to-hearts and are really full of character development for everyone, even Tyrea and Melia. There's quite a lot of these too, and I enjoyed honestly every single one, even if some mattered less than others. These are a couple of the best things to come out of Feature Connected in my opinion. There's also these new pawn specters you can find around the shoulder, 12 of them to be specific. When you collect a certain number of them, you get to use the pawn specters attack, which replaces chain attacks. You can choose one of 3 options. One that heals your party and grants debuff immunity and has an area attack to the enemy, an area attack that deals major damage to the enemy, and an area attack that inflicts daze onto the enemy and also has a strength down perk. Essentially, these completely replace the need for chain attacks in some ways. You don't need to use a break, topple, and daze combination and chain attacks now because the pawn specters do it with one of their attacks. You don't need to heal in a chain attack because the pawn specters do that. I'll admit I was a bit iffy on the loss of chain attacks at first, but I really do like these, especially since they really can do a number on the enemy, especially if you get a second chance to do another attack. I'd say go out of your way to collect these guys. That being said, let's get into the negatives I felt with Feature Connected. One thing that genuinely disappoints me in Feature Connected is the lack of one big thing: gem crafting. In Xenoblade Chronicles, if you wanted to get gems for your weapons or armor, you could get them through multiple methods. But the easiest was easily gem crafting. You choose the gems you want to craft, you listen to the funny dialogue, and you will usually get those gems. But if they go into heat or anything above, you get a level higher than the gem you were crafting. It's a bit too randomized for my liking, but I'd argue it's even more random in Feature Connected. You just run up to underneath a crystal deposit and that's it. You get a gem from just going to the deposit and you can get the higher level gems later through a side quest. This is a lot worse in my opinion. Sure, it's simpler, but it's just not super interesting, and I'd argue again, it's much more randomized. At least you could choose the effect you wanted before, now you don't. There are some issues I also found personally with side quests and the reward you earned. Now, XP was usually fine for me, I never really found that to be a problem. Money and weapons on the other hand are a much different story. Side quests are plenty once again in Feature Connected, and they're fine at most, nothing amazing like in the base game, but the rewards are kinda off. In the original, you get usually one of 3 things: a weapon, XP, money, or sometimes a combination of the 3, with usually money and XP. You earned a good bit of money too, and for how quickly you knock out quests in Xenoblade Chronicles, running out of money is rarely ever an issue, even early on. For me doing, I want to say, over 40 quests in Feature Connected, I can't be the only one who's running out of money a lot, right? It seems like the rewards are usually just money, XP, or weapon, and rarely ever a combination of the 3. The weapons you got were usually weaker than the ones you could find around the world, and the money you got was so minimal for how much you usually put into it. I can buy about 2 headpieces for Melia and Shulk, and that's about it. It's extremely weird. Also, the shops of the armor are just a bit disappointing. You have armor that is really just armor from the original game and just brought over, and rarely new armor. When it comes down to combat, Kino and Nene are your 2 new party members, aka Ryan and Charlotte with a new coat of paint. This isn't a huge deal to me, especially because I think Ryan's moves make the most sense, but oh my god, is Kino's AI worse than Charlotte's or something? I swear to god, his AI is actually so much worse than hers when it comes to actually healing party members. Honestly, that's about all I can say without getting into spoiler territory. Feature Connected, like I said, is fine at best. It is fairly disappointing though that it's wildly inconsistent. If you were to ask me which was better, this or Torna the Golden Country, Torna easily has this beat in both story and gameplay. At least side quests are required to continue the story in Feature Connected. But still, I'd recommend you play this in the end for a solid end to Melia's character and for being able to explore the shoulder. After all that, we are finally done. This is easily one of my longest videos yet, but I'm happy that it was over this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It really was a dream come true that this game actually happened, and it was everything that I wanted and then some. The journey getting to Definitive Edition wasn't really a long one, but it's one I don't think I'll forget. From interacting with a bunch of you guys down below and on my Twitter page, to watching all of the trailers and everything, this was an incredible experience. I couldn't be happier with this. Even if I was fairly disappointed with Feature Connected, I'm happy the shoulder is finally a thing. But the product as a whole is amazing. While some things in the base game are still a bit rough, like the AI in battles, it rarely harmed my overall experience, which was still a phenomenal one. I spent 120 hours in this game and did 400 side quests, and I already want to play it again. Hell, I'm actually doing a New Game Plus playthrough at this moment. This was an amazing experience, and one I don't think I'll be forgetting anytime soon. If you've never played the series before, I implore you to jump in with Definitive Edition. It's an amazing time even 10 years later, and still my favorite game ever made. Monolith Soft, you guys did an incredible job. Whatever the future has in store for the future of the Xeno series, I'll be sure to stick around for it. Thank you all very much for watching, have a great night, and signing off. Peace out, soldiers.